13 days, that's how long East Palestine, Ohio waited. 13 days without a visit, without a press conference, without a single apology from the person they were told would protect them. And then, J.D. Vance walked into the Senate chamber and slammed his fist on the desk. Cameras caught the moment he called out Pete Buttigieg by name, demanding he resign. The room froze. But this wasn't just about politics. This was about a town coughing in silence, a mother who hadn't slept in 5 nights, and a little girl who handed J.D. a crayon drawing with flames, a broken train, and the words, "You came." He didn't. What made J.D. Vance risk everything in that moment? And how did a single drawing become the spark that set off a national firestorm? The story you're about to hear wasn't taken from headlines. It was shaped from something quieter. The names and moments have been imagined, but the feelings they carry, the weight of waiting, the hope of being heard, those are real. And sometimes, a story like this is just another way of saying, "We see you, so stay with us." Because some stories don't just deserve to be told, they deserve to be felt. East Palestine, Ohio, 3:58 a.m. It began with a sound no one could quite name, a low metallic groan, followed by a shudder in the earth, like the ground itself was holding its breath. Then came the snap, loud, final, the kind of sound that wakes dogs before people. On a cold stretch of freight tracks slicing through the backyards of East Palestine, Ohio, train #4071, a mile-long monster of steel and rust, lurched violently to the left, one wheel jammed, then another. In seconds, the first car lifted off the rail like it had been yanked by an unseen hand. Car #3 was carrying vinyl chloride. Car #4 was too. So was car #9. The derailment didn't happen in one great crash. It unfolded like a grim dance. Sparks spat out from under the wheels as 17 cars twisted like a spine breaking in slow motion. And then, the boom. It wasn't just an explosion. It was a blast that cracked windows 5 blocks away, knocked paintings off living room walls, and sent a murder of crows shrieking into the sky. A plume of chemical smoke rose into the night air, glowing faint green under the distant street lamps. It had the smell of something sweet, sickly sweet, the kind of smell you only notice when it's already too late. Inside house 207 on Larch Street, 8-year-old Emery Holtz sat up in bed, coughing so hard her pillow was soaked. Her mother, Danica, had been awake. Like most single mothers, sleep was never a luxury, just an idea. She rushed in, eyes already burning, grabbed Emery in one arm, and yanked open the window. The smell slapped her across the face. Acrid, unnatural. Her eyes welled. Her throat closed. She screamed, "Somebody help! She can't breathe! She can't breathe!" But outside, the sirens had already started. A long, droning, warbling sound that felt like it came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The kind of siren you hear in nightmares. Emergency lights stuttered through the fog. Red, white, blue, then all red. Police, fire, hazmat, but not enough of them. Never enough in places like East Palestine. On the corner, an elderly man, Mr. Kirchner, a retired rail worker, stood barefoot in the frost, just a t-shirt and pajama pants, watching the clouds spread like spilled ink across the sky. "Not again," he muttered. "God, not again." At the edge of town, a camera mounted on a rusty traffic pole captured the scene in grainy silence. The overturned cars, the flickering haze, a mother carrying a coughing child down the street, wrapped in a bedsheet, and in the background, one detail that the news would later play on loop. A railroad crossing light, bent and blinking, its red arms stuck halfway down, clicking over and over into fog. Click, click, click. No one knew it yet, but that sound, that blinking, would be the first and last warning many families would get. And somewhere inside that smoke, in the confusion and panic, something far more dangerous than chemicals was spreading. The silence of leadership, no news alert, no federal response, no message from the Department of Transportation, just a mother holding a child, walking barefoot through the smoke, with no one coming. Yet, the capital slept, but the country didn't. In a townhouse near Lincoln Park, J.D. Vance stirred as the vibration on his nightstand grew insistent. He'd trained himself not to jump at every ping. Not every notification was a crisis, but this one didn't stop. It buzzed once, twice, then the third time came with a call. Unknown number, but routed through his Senate aide's extension. He answered, voice low and rough. Vance. A pause, then. Sir, it's East Palestine. It's bad. J.D. blinked, sat up. He'd visited the district during his early campaign, a quiet rail town where people waved from porches, and the diner coffee was better than it had any right to be. His mind raced past the sleep fog. How bad? He asked. He heard a rustle of paper, breathing, then his aide. Vinyl chloride, several cars, derailment at 3:58, multiple fires, children coughing blood, livestock down, local hospitals are overwhelmed, states responding, but JD's breath caught. But what? There's no word from DOT. No statement, no arrival, nothing. And the White House? Silent. FEMA. Still assessing. Jesus. A second voice cut in. Another aide patched into the call. We're hearing from one of our field staff that residents are evacuating without guidance. No one's coordinated local transport. Some are walking out on foot. The air is thick with something, maybe the chemical plume. Sir, people are panicking. JD stood, the phone pressed to his ear, staring at nothing. His bare feet found the cold floor. He was fully awake now. The room was quiet, sterile. No screens on, no lights except a flicker from the hallway. And yet, through the speaker, he could feel the heat, hear the crackling, smell the smoke in the silence between updates. Then came the line that settled into his chest like a stone. A whisper from the aide on site. Just 3 words. Nobody's coming, sir. JD closed his eyes. Not in shock. In recognition. He'd heard that phrase before. Different towns, different faces, but always the same pattern. When something broke where the cameras never went, the answer wasn't delay. It was absence. He opened the drawer beside him and pulled out a folder marked unofficial briefings. Inside, he found a map, folded, well-worn, of freight routes through rural Ohio. He stared at the red line that cut through East Palestine like a scar. He spoke without hesitation, voice quiet but certain. Get the car. I want to be wheels up in 45 minutes. Senator, it's 4:03 in the morning. They don't need another statement. They need someone who shows up. He grabbed the coat he never wore in D.C., the same one he'd worn on the factory floor back in Middletown, and paused by the front door. His phone buzzed again. Updates, alerts, silence from leadership. He didn't look at it. As he stepped outside, the air hit him. Bitter, cold, electric. Somewhere far off, even in D.C., the sky had changed. It wasn't visible yet, but he felt it in the bones of the night. Something had already broken. He didn't know yet what he would find when he got there, but he knew what he would no longer tolerate. By the time the sun cracked the horizon, the fog had thickened, not lifted. It wasn't a natural fog. It had weight, a texture, a smell that clung to clothes and skin, like plastic burning in slow motion. J.D. Vance stepped out of the black SUV just outside a closed gas station. No press vans, no entourage, no podium waiting, just him, his driver, and the weight of what he was walking into. Ash clung to everything, to mailboxes, to rusted pickup trucks, to the yellow plastic swing sets in front yards. Footprints from the night before were still visible in the soot. Tracks of parents who had fled on foot carrying children in blankets. J.D. brushed his fingers across the hood of a red Chevy caked in gray. His fingers came back black. He didn't say a word. The town felt paused. Not empty, just emotionally evacuated. No dogs barked. No engines idled. The silence was so complete that even the birds hadn't come back. He passed the post office. A handwritten sign on the door, ink smudged by something chemical, read, "Temporarily closed. No air circulation." He didn't need confirmation. The air tasted metallic. A few blocks ahead, a makeshift triage station had been set up outside the old middle school gym. A line of residents stood shivering, waiting for checkups that no one could explain clearly. The nurses wore improvised masks. Some wore none. JD didn't make an announcement. He didn't ask for attention. But someone saw him. An older man sitting on a wooden crate, back hunched, lifted his head as JD approached. His eyes were red, not from tears but from exposure. His jacket bore a faded patch. 3rd Infantry Division. His hands were raw, like he hadn't taken off his gloves in hours. "You're the senator?" the man asked flatly. JD nodded. The vet's voice was tired, but it cut clean. "I fought overseas, saw hell in 2 countries. I never thought I'd get poisoned at home." JD didn't respond immediately. He stepped forward and shook the man's hand. Firm, respectful. Then quietly he said, "You won't be ignored again." The veteran looked away, back toward the drifting smoke. "That's what they always say," he muttered. JD said nothing, just stood there, letting the moment settle, until the man added, without looking back, "You're the first one to show up." And that's when JD saw her again. Not the man's daughter, but the symbol. A little girl in line, coughing into a pink scarf, clutching a crayon drawing, torn at the edges. Flames, a train, a stick figure holding hands with another. The words scrawled under it, "You came." He didn't. JD's jaw tightened. He turned away, not from disgust, but to gather something in his chest that he couldn't name yet. Not rage, not pity. Something colder, something harder. One of his aides, catching up, asked quietly, "Do you want us to prepare remarks?" JD didn't even blink. "No," he said. "I didn't come here to talk. I came here to see." Then more quietly to himself, barely audible over the wind, "If no one else will, then I will." He kept walking, past the ash, past the blinking railroad lights still stuck in that endless loop, past the people who had stopped expecting anyone to come. And now someone had. The gymnasium still smelled faintly of crayons. That was the first thing JD noticed as he stepped through the side entrance of East Palestine Elementary, or what was left of it. Once filled with students running between classrooms, it was now a makeshift emergency shelter, hastily reactivated overnight. The basketball hoops were still bolted high above, but the court had been overtaken by cots, blankets, and coughing. So much coughing. Children curled beneath silver emergency blankets, their cheeks flushed, eyes watery. Mothers sat beside them, fanning them with manila folders or holding towels dampened with bottled water, when they had it. JD scanned the perimeter. No formal aid tents, no military presence, no visible FEMA coordination, just one aging nurse from the county hospital checking pulses with a watch instead of a monitor. The air was dense, not with heat, but with something worse, the weight of chemicals that refused to fully settle. Every breath carried a metallic aftertaste. JD could feel it in the back of his throat already. He passed by a cardboard sign duct taped to a locker. "Water out, do not drink." A plastic folding table had been set up near the entrance with scattered supplies, cough drops, bandages, packets of generic electrolyte powder. No bottled water. No proper masks. Just piles of the kind of loose paper surgical masks you'd see in dollar stores, mostly unused because even the children knew they wouldn't do anything here. At the back of the gym, a cluster of teachers, not volunteers but actual teachers who had once run these halls, were handing out peanut butter crackers from a single open box. JD approached slowly. One of them, a woman maybe in her early 50s, hair tied back in a pencil, turned when she saw him. Her name tag had been scribbled on a sticky note, Ms. G, 3rd grade. She recognized him. Everyone had, at some point that morning. But this time, she didn't try to smile. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. JD nodded gently and asked, "How long have you been here?" Her voice cracked. "Since 5 a.m. yesterday. Most of us never left." He looked around again. The wall-mounted alphabet chart still hanging, the row of miniature lockers covered in ash-dusted coats. "Where's FEMA?" he asked softly. She didn't answer. She just laughed once, bitterly, like the question itself was offensive. Then she looked straight at him, eyes brimming with heat. Where's the secretary? Where's anyone? We're babysitting kids in a gas cloud with no clean water, no masks, no plan. We're teachers, not soldiers. JD didn't respond right away. His eyes drifted to the line of kids waiting for checkups. One child coughing into the sleeve of her jacket, another staring blankly at the ceiling tiles like he'd given up on asking what happened. A sudden sound cut through the gym, a loud wheezing from a boy no older than 7. He gripped the edge of his cot, trying to sit up. His mother whispered, "Breathe, baby, breathe," over and over like a prayer. But the inhaler in her hand was empty. JD turned toward his aide standing near the entrance. "Get a medical crew in here. Now, I don't care if we have to call hospitals in Pittsburgh." "Already trying, sir. Everyone's backed up. Try harder." He turned back to the teacher. "We're going to get you help." She stared at him, unmoved. "You all say that." "No," JD replied, voice firm now. "I didn't come here to say it. I came here to start it." And in that moment, the silence in the gym shifted, not because trust had returned, but because for the first time in 13 days, someone had said it to their face. The old county road was nothing special. 2 lanes of cracked asphalt cutting between dormant farmland and snow-streaked pastures. No podium, no press risers. Just cold wind, tilled dirt, and the kind of quiet that follows too much loss. J.D. Vance stood in the middle of it all, jacket collar up, face drawn from what he'd seen inside the school just an hour before. He hadn't said much to his aide since then. He didn't need to. His silence spoke for itself. Behind him, locals gathered. No invitation sent, no event scheduled. They came because word had spread fast. The senator's going to speak. Not on TV, not in D.C. here. A few had brought lawn chairs. Most just stood, arms crossed against the wind, their boots caked in frost and ash. Among them were teachers, farmers, truckers, and parents still wearing the same clothes from the night of the explosion. A single microphone had been wired to a portable speaker, duct taped to a folding table. No stage, no lights, just one voice about to rise where silence had lingered too long. JD stepped forward, no notes in hand. The wind tugged at his coat. He looked out, not at the camera they'd reluctantly set up on a tripod, but at the people who had been told to wait. He took a breath. Then clearly, "East Palestine deserves better than this." No one clapped. No one cheered. That wasn't the tone. It wasn't a rally. It was a reckoning. JD continued, "For 13 days, this town has choked, not just on chemicals, but on silence. And let's be clear, what happened here wasn't just an accident. It was a failure of attention, a failure of urgency, a failure of leadership." He scanned the crowd, saw the veteran from earlier, the teacher holding a clipboard, a teenager with asthma clutching a scarf over his mouth, all watching him, all still waiting for someone, anyone, to admit what they already knew. The people here aren't asking for sympathy. They're asking for air they can breathe, water they can drink, leaders who don't need a trending hashtag to care. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The Secretary of Transportation has yet to set foot in this town. No FEMA tents, no White House response. And the longer we wait for someone to take responsibility, the clearer the truth becomes. If you're not from a city with a TV tower, they think you don't matter. A few heads nodded. One woman wiped her eye with a gloved hand. JD paused. Let the wind carry his words across the field. "But I didn't come here to speak for headlines. I came because I remember places like this. I was raised in one. I know what it means to be overlooked. I know what it means when the people in charge look away. And I'm telling you now, I won't." He stepped back. The mic clicked as it went silent. There was no applause, just the sound of breath, shifting feet, and a moment shared without needing to be explained. Then a farmer raised a phone and hit record. The clip was online within minutes. By sunset, it had passed 2 million views. Title on Twitter, "One senator, one town, no excuses." And for the first time since the train exploded in the dark, East Palestine wasn't alone in the fog. 10 days. That's how long it had been since the blast tore through East Palestine. Since the rail cars hissed their chemicals into the night sky. since families had packed overnight bags without knowing if they'd ever come back. And still no sign of the Secretary of Transportation. Not a statement, not a visit, not a single image of Pete Buttigieg anywhere near the region. His social media feeds remained populated with pre-scheduled posts about infrastructure equity and urban renewal, each met with a rising tide of bitter comments. Where are you, Pete? Appalachia isn't on your map? Say something, anything. But the answers never came. In press briefings, White House spokespersons dodged the question. We're in close contact with relevant agencies. The situation is being assessed. We'll have more to share soon. But 10 days had passed, and for the people breathing the fallout, soon was already too late. J.D. Vance stood on a hill overlooking the edge of the containment zone, watching the haze settle over the abandoned rail line. The same red lights from the crossing post still blinked into nothing, rhythmic and useless. His aide approached from behind. Sir, press wants a statement about DOT. They're starting to notice the silence. J.D. didn't turn around. He just said flatly, good. They should. Later that evening, he sat alone in the back room of a local fire station, scrolling through his phone. The video of his roadside speech had now passed 3.1 million views. Hashtags trended. Hashtag East Palestine Forgotten, hashtag Where is Pete, and hashtag Show Up or Step Down. He opened Twitter, typed, deleted, typed again. Then finally he pressed send. If the Secretary of Transportation can't find the time to stand with a town that's been poisoned, then he shouldn't hold the job. If he won't show up, then step down. At J.D. Vance 1. The tweet spread like a live wire across media outlets. Within hours, cable networks picked it up. CNN cut in with a segment titled, Senator Vance Calls Out Buttigieg. Fox News pushed the hashtag on the chyron. MSNBC's anchors debated whether the moment marked an opportunist play or a genuine cry for accountability. But for East Palestine, it wasn't about politics. It was about the fact that a woman named Trina Lawrence, who hadn't left her house in 5 days because her son's oxygen tank couldn't travel, still hadn't seen a federal official cross her porch. It was about the 8th grader who had missed 10 days of school, not because of illness, but because the school bus didn't run through a contaminated zone. It was about the fact that the only faces people trusted were the ones covered in ash standing beside them, not the ones on press podiums hundreds of miles away. When asked again by reporters, DOT's official spokesperson responded, "The Secretary is monitoring the situation and remains engaged with the team on the ground." But there was no team on the ground, and everyone knew it. So the next day, J.D. did what he knew would escalate the stakes. He didn't schedule a press conference. He simply returned to the same microphone on the same farm road and repeated his message, this time with a name. Mr. Buttigieg, the time for planning is over. The time for visibility is now. If leadership means anything, it means showing up. And you haven't. He paused. Then, this isn't personal. It's not partisan. It's moral. People here are breathing fire, and they've been met with silence. That clip went viral too, and the silence of one secretary had just become a national conversation. It arrived in an unmarked envelope, dropped off at J.D. Vance's Senate office during the early hours of a Friday morning. No return address, no sender name, just a single printed document folded in thirds and sealed inside a manila folder labeled, Confidential, Internal Use Only. His chief of staff opened it first. She read the first few lines, then called J.D. directly. He was back in D.C., just off a red-eye from Ohio. Tired, unslept, still smelling faintly of smoke, and the inside of church basements where people handed him handwritten notes instead of handshakes. When she handed him the email, he read it once in silence. Then again, slower. It was dated 47 days before the East Palestine derailment. Subject line, Mechanical Brake Risk Alert. Midwest Freight Corridors. It had come from a mid-level Department of Transportation engineer. Someone J.D. had never heard of, someone who likely never expected this document to surface again. But there it was, line after line, calmly outlining the known risks in certain freight models, particularly the aging brake systems on cars carrying hazardous materials. The warning was clear. It referenced 2 internal studies. It noted heightened failure probability on inclines and older steel rail beds, especially in cold weather. It urged DOT to review and flag high-volume corridors for immediate inspection. And then the kicker. This corridor intersects multiple rural communities with limited emergency response capacity. Should failure occur, containment could be delayed. Recommend urgent review. Stamped in the top right corner in red. Received in December 28th. Initialed, filed, not followed up. No reply attached, no corrective actions. Just a silent trail that ended at someone's inbox and died there. JD looked up from the paper. Do we know who sent this? Anonymous drop. We're trying to trace the envelope's origin, but the timing, yeah. He nodded. The timing is intentional. He leaned back, fingers steepled, eyes locked on the document like it might start burning in his hands. This wasn't just political anymore. This wasn't about who tweeted first or showed up last. This was a warning, sent, seen, and shelved. He rose slowly, walked over to his desk, and laid the email flat under a reading lamp. The red stamp seemed to glow under the light. It wasn't just the date that struck him. It was the casual tone of the memo, the bureaucratic language that made catastrophe sound like paperwork. Someone had known, not just suspected, known. Later that day, in a closed-door meeting, JD's staff debated strategy. Should we go public immediately? Verify first, leak management. If we accuse too soon, if we wait too long, JD cut through the noise. His voice didn't rise, but the room went silent. This isn't a leak, it's a mirror. We're not exposing them. They expose themselves. He tapped the paper once, then turned toward the press office. Prep a controlled release, but not to cable. Not yet. We go straight to the people. I want every resident in that town to see this before Washington does. Within hours, a digital copy of the email was posted on JD's official channels, accompanied by just one caption. They knew. They were warned, and they did nothing. The tweet went viral in 12 minutes. By sunset, the hashtag.new was trending nationwide. A journalist from The Hill called it the memo that could derail more than a train. And somewhere in a gray corridor of a federal building, someone who thought this document would never be seen again was no longer sleeping easy. The room wasn't built for drama, but it got it anyway. The Senate Committee on Transportation was already packed when JD Vance arrived, the leaked email folded neatly in his breast pocket like a blade he hadn't yet drawn. Staffers whispered behind laptops. Cameramen repositioned. Reporters perched like hawks above the gallery railings. The hearing had only been scheduled 36 hours earlier, called not by the chairman, but by JD himself, invoking emergency oversight powers rarely used and even more rarely respected. Still, everyone showed up. At the far end of the long oak table sat Secretary Pete Buttigieg, clean-cut, composed, unreadable. He wore a charcoal suit, blue tie, hands clasped, jaw set. He'd declined interviews for days. Now he would answer, or try to. JD didn't open with pleasantries. Mr. Secretary, he said, leaning forward, voice steady. Did you read this email? He lifted the printed document between two fingers and held it for all to see. The cameras zoomed in. The red stamp. The title, Mechanical Brake Risk Alert, Midwest Freight Corridors. Silence stretched. Pete adjusted his mic, then answered, Senator, I receive dozens of internal memos a week. I trust my staff to elevate issues that require... So you didn't read it? A murmur rippled through the room. Pete blinked. I'm saying that in a department of this size, internal risk alerts are part of a broader evaluation. 47 days before East Palestine was poisoned, your department was warned, in writing, that this exact kind of brake failure could lead to catastrophic derailments in rural corridors. It mentioned towns with limited emergency infrastructure. That's not a red flag to you? Another senator, a senior Democrat, jumped in. Let's not turn this into political theater. We all care about the people of Ohio. JD didn't turn, didn't blink. No, you care now. When there are cameras. The room stilled. He continued, voice calm but razor sharp. The people of East Palestine didn't need a performance. They needed presence. They didn't get it. Now we find out someone inside DOT tried to sound the alarm and got buried under bureaucracy. Pete cleared his throat. We are reviewing all internal communications. We take this leak seriously. It's not a leak, JD interrupted. It's a warning you ignored, and it's now public because someone inside your department believed the people of Ohio deserved the truth more than you did. Another senator tried to pivot the discussion. Shouldn't we be focusing on moving forward with solutions rather than rehashing blame? JD turned toward him slowly. Accountability isn't rehashing. It's the first step toward a solution. His hand hovered over the email again, fingers tapping it lightly. If this memo had been acted on, if these cars had been inspected, if proper protocols had been followed, then maybe, just maybe, a little girl in East Palestine wouldn't be drawing fire and smoke with broken crayons. That line stuck. The chairman tried to call for order, but the room had already shifted. Reporters were scribbling. Cameras were locked in. The hearing had gone from routine oversight to national confrontation, and Pete Buttigieg, for the first time during his tenure, looked like a man cornered not by politics, but by paper. The house was too quiet. That was the first thing JD noticed as he stepped inside. It sat just off the state road, 1 mile east of the derailment site, a single-story home with white siding turned gray from days of chemical haze. The front lawn hadn't been mowed since before the blast. No children's toys in the yard. Just a small wind chime that didn't move anymore, like even the wind had stopped coming here. A woman greeted him at the door. Monica Rader, early 40s, eyes lined from sleepless nights, but no tears. Not anymore. Her expression didn't ask for comfort, and JD didn't offer any. He only nodded and stepped into a home that felt suspended in the moment, just after a breath never taken. The living room was clean but untouched. No TV on, no music. A folded blanket on the couch, slippers neatly set by the door. She led him down the hall without a word. The door to her son's bedroom was open. JD stepped inside. There was a poster of planets on the wall, a small bookshelf filled with hand-me-down novels and science kits. The bed was made, too neatly, as if the act itself had become ceremonial. But what caught JD's eye was the desk. Not the lamp, not the school books. The homework. It lay there, unfinished. Pencil still resting at an angle. A worksheet labeled respiratory system, diagram the lungs. His name in the corner, Ethan Rader, grade 6. JD didn't touch it. He only looked. Long enough to feel the weight of the contradiction. A child learning how to breathe while dying because no one had warned his mother not to. Monica's voice broke the silence, quiet but direct. They told us to stay inside. Shut the windows. Don't panic. So we did. JD turned to her. Her hands were clenched around the edge of the doorframe. We trusted them. She didn't need to say who. JD already knew. He woke up at 2 a.m. coughing. By 4, he couldn't walk straight. The paramedics were rerouted, said to wait it out. They said it was probably just stress. He died trying to breathe. He died on the floor right there. She pointed and JD followed her gaze to a narrow patch of carpet just beside the bed. There was no outrage in her voice, no demand, just absence, as if grief had hollowed out even the strength it took to be angry. JD swallowed, tried to speak, but nothing came. She stepped into the room now, slowly, and picked up the worksheet. She folded it in half and then in quarters. Then she handed it to him. Take it to Washington. Show them what it looks like when a child does everything right and still gets left behind. JD held the paper, stunned by its lightness. It weighed nothing, and yet he felt the full pressure of what it meant in his hand. Outside, his driver waited silently. He didn't ask what happened in the house. He didn't need to. JD sat in the back seat, holding the folded homework like it was classified material, more urgent than any memo. He stared out the window. The family had said everything and without raising their voices, and the silence they left behind followed him all the way back to Capitol Hill. It was the 13th day, 13 days since the derailment, since vinyl chloride hissed into the wind, since the evacuation orders were quietly lifted and families were told, almost casually, that it was safe to return. The language had been clinical, levels within acceptable limits. No cause for long-term concern. Residents may resume normal activities, but nothing in East Palestine felt normal. Dogs stopped eating, birds disappeared, entire flocks of chickens were found lifeless in backyard coops, eyes open, feathers stiff. Cats refused to drink from bowls. Parents who brought their children home from emergency shelters now found them vomiting by morning. Rashes, headaches, nosebleeds. At the corner gas station, a handwritten sign was taped to the pump. Don't touch the tap water, trust your nose. And in the diner, the only one still open, customers sipped coffee in silence while their eggs went cold. No one wanted to talk about it, but everyone knew. Whatever was in the air was still here. J.D. Vance returned to the town that morning without an announcement. He wasn't there for press. He wasn't there for comfort. He was there for evidence. He stopped first at a home just outside the derailment radius. The family had called his office 4 times. Their 6-year-old had woken up with blood on her pillow. The mother handed him a mason jar filled with water. The label read, Monday, kitchen tap. He held it up to the light. The color looked normal, but the smell, even through the lid, burned faintly in the nose like melted plastic. He collected 6 more jars from 6 more homes. Then he drove them back to Columbus himself. Within 48 hours, 3 independent scientists, 2 from the state university, 1 from a neutral lab in Pennsylvania, gave him preliminary results. Volatile organic compounds, chlorinated byproducts, traces of something called phosgene, a chemical once used in World War I as a nerve agent. J.D. didn't wait for a formal hearing. He called a press conference the next morning, right there on the same farm road where he had first spoken. No stage, just a folding table, a row of water jars lined up like courtroom evidence, and a whiteboard with only one word written across it. Safe? He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. These aren't numbers from a distant lab. These are kitchen sinks. These are bathtubs where parents wash their children. This is the water they told people was safe. He held up a report. But it's not. Then he looked directly at the cameras. When you say it's safe and people start coughing blood, that's not a mistake. That's negligence dressed in press release language. The clip went viral again. Cable news split in half, some calling it panic politics, others asking why FEMA had yet to send a single water tank. The EPA issued a new statement that evening, cautiously worded, "We are reevaluating current air and water conditions. Further testing underway." J.D. didn't reply to the statement. Instead, he tweeted, "You don't need another round of testing to tell a mother her child is sick. You just need the courage to admit you were wrong." And for the first time, people across the country began asking the same question. If it's safe, why does it feel like poison? The envelope was unmarked. No return address, no seal, just a soft fold in the center, like someone had carried it tucked inside a jacket for too long. J.D.'s aide found it placed gently on the windshield of their rented SUV, parked outside the town's old post office, now serving as a temporary relief center. Inside the envelope, a single sheet of white printer paper, and on it, a drawing in crayon. A small 2-story house stood off to the left, crooked windows colored in shaky blue lines. Surrounding it were flames, jagged and frantic, in red and orange and streaks of black. Smoke rose from the rooftop in long spirals, drawn with a dull gray pencil that had clearly been sharpened down to the wood. But what stopped J.D.'s breath was the figure on the right. A man, simple and stick-figured, stood between the fire and the house. One arm was extended forward, holding a round, uneven shape, a shield. A bold U was written on the figure's chest in purple crayon. Beneath it, in smaller letters, "Thank you for not leaving." Signed only, Emily, age 7. J.D. didn't speak for a long time. He stood in the gravel parking lot, the cold wind biting against his coat, holding that sheet of paper as if it were glass. Cameras were off. There were no reporters, no donors, no microphones. Just him, the drawing, and the silence of a town still coughing in the shadows of someone else's mistake. Later that night, in an interview with a local affiliate, The reporter asked him, softly, how it felt to be the only federal official consistently present since the derailment. JD reached into his folder, unfolded the drawing, and held it up to the camera. "This isn't a story," he said, voice catching. "This isn't a political stunt or a campaign. This is a little girl who thinks a crayon drawing is the only way to be heard." He paused, blinking fast. "That's what we've done to people. We've made them believe they need to thank us for simply showing up." He didn't cry. Not exactly. But his voice trembled enough for the camera to stay on his face a second longer than usual. That clip didn't go viral. It wasn't meant to. But the still image, JD holding the drawing, was posted by a volunteer medic that night. It spread quietly at first, then rapidly. Nurses, teachers, veterans, mothers. Some posted their own kids' drawings beneath it, tagged only with the phrase, "This is who showed up." The drawing was later framed and hung in JD's Senate office. Not on the wall behind his desk, but directly across from where he sat, so that every meeting, every negotiation, every call began with a glance at Emily's house and the crooked red fire. And the shield. It reminded him, not of his strength, but of her fear. And it reminded the country of something else too. Sometimes the most honest testimony doesn't come from a speech. It comes in crayon. It began with just 8 seconds of footage. A video, grainy and overexposed, captured Pete Buttigieg at a ribbon-cutting ceremony in Nevada. The transportation secretary stood at the edge of a solar panel array, surrounded by executives in tailored suits. The wind was light, the desert sun bright. At one point, someone off camera cracked a joke about supply chains. Pete laughed. That was it. 8 seconds. A public official smiling, even laughing. But the timing was fatal. Less than 48 hours earlier, J.D. Vance had stood outside a condemned home in East Palestine, holding a little girl's crayon drawing. Her house in flames, her plea in purple. "Thank you for not leaving." A volunteer EMT clipped the two moments together. J.D.'s cracked voice versus Pete's laughter. The caption? Which one showed up? By morning, it had been reposted 17,000 times. By noon, #resign now was trending across every major platform. The outrage wasn't partisan. It wasn't just conservatives or JD's base or veterans from Appalachia, teachers in Milwaukee, nurses in Akron, a pastor in Georgia, a retired railroad worker in Montana who tweeted, "I lost my lung to a chemical plant. I know that laugh. It's not for us." Talk show panels erupted. CNN played the clip 3 times in 1 hour. Fox aired it on loop with sirens blaring beneath. MSNBC brought on a behavioral expert to analyze the optics of perceived neglect. And still, Pete Buttigieg remained silent. No tweet, no press conference, no statement. Even White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre seemed caught off guard when asked. "We are evaluating the situation and coordinating resources," she said flatly. But the clip cut to East Palestine school gym, still without masks or bottled water. Then JD posted. Not a video this time, not a speech. Just a still photo of him shaking hands with a local veteran in front of a burned-out truck. The caption, in bold, read, "Your silence is not professionalism, it's abandonment." Within minutes, #abandonment trended beside #resign now. The press descended. Pete's office issued a brief statement late that evening. Secretary Buttigieg remains fully engaged in the department's ongoing efforts. But it was too late. By then, even liberal columnists were asking hard questions. An op-ed in The Atlantic read, "In a nation of disasters, presence is policy." The fury wasn't only about the train, it was about being forgotten. Again. About government officials who flew over the flyover states, waved from stages, and disappeared when the cameras stopped rolling. Pete's laugh, innocuous on its own, became a symbol of distance, detachment, and disregard. JD didn't need to stoke the flames. They were already roaring. Instead, he returned to the town hall in East Palestine, this time with federal inspectors in tow. When a teenager asked if the secretary would ever come, JD didn't flinch. He had the chance. He chose silence. That's an answer, too. Later that week, local graffiti appeared on a plywood wall by the tracks. "Toxic air. Quiet trains, louder truth. And in homes across Ohio, people whispered about something they hadn't seen in years. A politician who didn't wait to be told where to go. He just went. The hearing room was packed before dawn. Journalists elbowed for space. Staffers whispered near the marble columns. Protesters outside held homemade signs with phrases like, "We can't breathe vinyl," and "Where was Pete?" Their voices filtered faintly through the chamber walls, a muffled chant that never quite stopped. Inside, Senator J.D. Vance sat at the front of the semicircle, flanked by two aides. A closed binder rested on the table before him, perfectly centered. He didn't open it. He didn't move much. His eyes were fixed on the double doors at the back of the chamber. At exactly 9:11 a.m., those doors creaked open. Pete Buttigieg stepped in. He wore a pristine navy suit, crisp white shirt, muted gray tie. No coat, no visible sweat. But there was a stiffness in the way he walked. Shoulders pulled tight, jaws set just a bit too firm. His eyes scanned the room, trying not to look nervous, but failing under the weight of the silence. Cameras flashed, not the polite kind, the kind that stung. He offered a quick nod to the room, his lips curled in what might have been a smile. Awkward, uncertain, quickly dropped. He approached the witness seat, sat, poured water from a glass pitcher. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone. J.D. still hadn't blinked. Chairwoman Booker gave the opening statement. Procedural, dry, respectful. Then it was J.D.'s turn. He didn't raise his voice. "Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us. Finally." A few murmurs scattered across the chamber. Pete nodded once, but J.D. was already looking down at a page in his binder. On February 3rd at 3:58 in the morning, a Norfolk Southern freight train carrying toxic vinyl chloride derailed in East Palestine, Ohio. You were notified by 7 a.m., confirmed? Pete leaned into the mic. That is correct. You did not make a public statement until day 11. Yes, and you did not visit the site until day 20. Yes, but we were coordinating with EPA. Did the EPA tell you not to speak? Pete paused. No. Did anyone in the White House instruct you to delay? Another pause. No. So the silence was your choice? The air in the room thickened. Pete shifted in his seat. Senator, I take full responsibility for my timing, but I must emphasize, J.D. cut in still calmly. We're not discussing responsibility, we're discussing reality. And in East Palestine, the reality was simple. People were coughing up blood, animals died, kids drew pictures of their houses on fire, and while that happened, you were at a fundraiser in Nevada. Pete's face tightened. Respectfully, Senator, I don't think it's productive to reduce a national strategy to sound bites. I'm not reducing anything, Mr. Secretary. I'm remembering it. Silence again. J.D. finally opened the binder. Inside was a printed email. This is an internal dirt memo sent February 5th, 2 days after the derailment. It states, quote, "We are monitoring, but public messaging should remain minimal unless White House guidance is received." Can you explain that? Pete blinked. He reached for his own folder. Don't bother. The person who wrote it resigned last night. They forwarded it to my office. The gallery shifted. Reporters looked up. Some started typing faster. Outside, the chants continued, louder now. Through the glass, the words were faint but unmistakable. Step down, step down. J.D. closed the binder. You weren't late to the train derailment, Mr. Secretary. You were absent, and America noticed. Pete sat still, lips tight, jaw clenched. Across the country, millions watched the live stream, and somewhere in East Palestine, a mother whispered to the screen, he finally came, but he wasn't here. The press conference had ended, but the storm hadn't passed. A gray operations tent stood behind the temporary response center, away from the cameras and microphones. Inside, the lights buzzed faintly, casting shadows against the canvas walls. Folding chairs lined the perimeter, mostly empty. The air smelled of stale coffee and plastic. Pete Buttigieg sat stiffly at the fold-out table, jacket off, sleeves rolled, trying to massage the bridge of his nose. A stack of documents lay untouched in front of him. He didn't look up when J.D. Vance entered. J.D. didn't wait for permission. He dropped the memo. Hard. The plastic tabletop rattled. You knew. JD said quietly, the words sharp as cut glass. Pete glanced down at the paper. The internal dot email, time-stamped, irrefutable. He sighed, a long, deflating breath. I didn't see that memo until… JD cut him off. You didn't need to see it. You saw the headlines. You saw the footage. You saw the smoke rising off children's porches and still didn't get on a plane. Pete straightened, voice low but defensive. You don't understand how federal response coordination works. The system moves slow, yes, but not without purpose. We were monitoring… Not slow, JD snapped. Broken. The word hung in the air. JD didn't yell. He didn't need to. His voice was steady, but it cracked with something deeper than anger. Conviction. And you were supposed to fix it. Pete's face flushed slightly. You think it's that simple? No, JD replied, stepping closer, eyes locked on his. I think it's that essential. Pete leaned back in his chair. The canvas wall behind him fluttered slightly from the wind outside. The muffled sound of protesters still echoed, distant but relentless. You think I don't care, Pete said finally, quieter than before. But I've been trying to stop the whole damn thing from falling apart. JD's jaw tightened. No, he said. You've been trying to manage it. I'm trying to change it. The silence in the tent felt thicker than any briefing room. For a long second, neither man moved. JD looked down at the drawing tucked into his pocket, crayon lines of fire, and a figure with a shield. The little girl's handwriting, you. He didn't show it. Instead, he leaned forward. A mother buried her son last week. I watched her put his homework in the casket. He'd drawn lungs. He'd circled them. He was learning to name the parts before they failed him. Pete closed his eyes. JD's voice dropped. If you still think this is about systems and optics and policy timelines, then I don't know how you look in the mirror, let alone lead a department. Pete didn't respond. He couldn't. JD took one last glance at the memo, then turned away. At the flap of the tent, he paused. I don't care if it's me, or the EPA, or FEMA, or someone we haven't even elected yet, but someone has to show up when the sirens start, and not 20 days later when it's politically safe. He walked out without another word. Inside, Pete sat frozen, the memo still untouched in front of him. The page trembled slightly as the wind brushed the canvas again. Outside, the sun was already starting to set, but inside that tent, it had never really risen. The flap of the tent peeled open with a snap. J.D. Vance stepped out first. The light of late afternoon struck his face, but he didn't flinch. His expression was composed, his posture upright, not triumphant, not angry, but carved with the stillness of a man who had made a decision he knew would land like a stone. Seconds later, Pete Buttigieg emerged. His suit jacket was back on, his collar adjusted, but something in his stride gave him away. A half-second hesitation in each step. His eyes darted, scanning the gathered press like someone bracing for a storm they could no longer control. And there it was, the crowd of reporters who'd waited like a coiled spring. Microphones lunged forward, boom mics overhead, dozens of phones held aloft, recording, streaming, uploading. A CNN correspondent called out first, Senator Vance, what was discussed in the tent? JD paused just long enough to draw a breath. The secretary said he'll do better, he said flatly. A brief hush. Cameras clicked. Then he added, voice lower but cutting, I say that's not enough. Gasps, murmurs. Pete blinked, but said nothing. JD continued. This isn't about who gets blamed. This is about who shows up. And right now our communities are still coughing, still afraid to drink their water, still burying their pets, and in some cases, their children. The words hit like sirens. Another reporter jumped in. Mr. Secretary, do you agree with Senator Vance's assessment? Pete looked toward the microphone, opened his mouth, and hesitated. He started, then shifted his weight. I believe there are valid concerns, and we're committed to making this right. JD turned slightly toward him, but didn't break eye contact with the press. This can't be fixed with optics, or press releases, or delayed apologies. Someone from Politico asked sharply, Senator Vance, are you calling for the Secretary's resignation? JD didn't blink. I've already said what I needed to say. The question now isn't about words. It's about accountability. Pete interjected. Too late, too light. We're here now, JD cut in, calm but firm. Yes, now after the headlines, after the hashtags, after the pain. The press surged. Phones buzzed in real time with alerts. One live stream hit 80,000 viewers within minutes. A young local reporter asked, Senator, what would you tell the families still sheltering in school basements tonight? JD looked directly into her lens. I'd tell them this. I saw what you saw. I heard what you heard. And unlike some, I believe you. He didn't need to raise his voice. The conviction was enough. Pete stood beside him, jaw set, shoulders tensing. But he knew. There was no walking this back. Another journalist shouted, Will the Department of Transportation commit to independent testing from this point forward? Pete offered a nod. We're evaluating. JD didn't let it linger. We don't have time for evaluations. We have time for action. And just like that, he stepped away. Not storming off, not grandstanding, just walking, as if there was nothing more to say, but everything more to do. Behind him, the press exploded into questions. Behind Pete, aides scrambled, whispering into headsets, already in damage control mode. By the time the segment aired on primetime news, the hashtags had already reached trending status. Hashtag Vance vs. Pete. Hashtag Resign Now. Hashtag East Palestine Forgotten. But in town, the moment that mattered wasn't the viral clip. It was a father standing by his truck, arms crossed, watching JD walk past and saying, under his breath, Finally. Someone didn't flinch. The clock read 2:12 a.m. JD Vance was still in his office. The rest of the Senate building lay quiet, blanketed in the hush that settles over marble corridors after midnight. But inside, JD's desk was a mess of highlighters, legal pads, and coffee-stained drafts. He stared at the sentence he had just written. No federal agency shall remain silent for more than 72 hours following a confirmed disaster. His pen hovered, then underlined the words twice. This wasn't a political stunt. It was a promise. And promises, especially ones made under pressure, demanded precision. The Community Safety and Response Act wasn't just another bill to file in a binder. It was born from the faces he couldn't forget. Children coughing in classrooms, parents tearing bottled water into rationed halves, a grieving mother holding her son's final homework with trembling hands. JD tapped his finger on a printout of a community memo from East Palestine that read, We've waited. We're still waiting. He muttered, Not again. The first draft of the act was bold, and deliberately so. It would empower any town declared in environmental distress to demand direct intervention within 72 hours, bypassing federal bottlenecks and triggering immediate resource deployment, regardless of bureaucracy. It would allow local officials to convene emergency hearings without needing federal approval, and it would criminalize the practice of silent windows, that unspoken period when federal agencies acknowledge a disaster but decline to publicly respond. He could already hear the pushback. It's too sweeping, too aggressive, too idealistic. But the memory of that tent meeting, of Pete Buttigieg's words, the system moves slow, played on repeat. JD whispered to himself, not slow. Not anymore. By dawn, the draft had grown to 18 pages. He met with 2 aides just after sunrise. We need bipartisan eyes on this before the press sees it, he told them. I don't care who gets the credit. I care that it passes. They exchanged a glance. One of them asked, Should we call it the East Palestine Act? JD paused. No, he said. That town already carried the burden. This is for every town that might be next. Word of the bill began to circulate by noon. Some conservative senators saw opportunity. Emergency authority for towns? That's federal overreach, one murmured behind closed doors. But JD wasn't posturing. He walked straight to a moderate Democrat's office. I'm not asking you to like the name on the bill, he said. I'm asking you to look a teacher in the eye and say no to clean air and honest timelines. That got their attention. The proposal triggered a media storm. Talk radio lit up. Cable news ran headlines. Senator J.D. Vance drafts radical safety overhaul. Vance targets silent bureaucracy after disaster fallout. At a small press briefing later that week, JD stood in front of a corkboard of photos. East Palestine families, overturned rail cars, the crayon drawing of the child holding a shield. He didn't speak in slogans. He said this: "When the worst happens, Americans don't freeze. They act. This law ensures our government will do the same." A reporter asked whether this was personal. JD didn't flinch. "It became personal the moment a little girl asked me why her dog stopped breathing." The room fell silent. Behind the scenes, opponents scrambled to review the act line by line. Lobbyists whispered. Some tried to stall, but JD had momentum and something even harder to stop: the public. Online, people began tagging their representatives. Hashtag no more silence, hashtag pass the act now. And on the back of JD's office door, someone taped a copy of the bill's title page with a handwritten note: "Hope, not just headlines." The backlash came faster than JD expected. Within 48 hours of introducing the Community Safety and Response Act, the whispers turned into open resistance. In closed-door meetings, the language was blunt. "It's a power grab," said a senior Democrat from New Jersey. "You're giving small towns a blank check to override federal process," barked a Republican from Texas. Even allies hesitated, using coded phrases like procedural concern or constitutional overreach. JD saw through it. It wasn't about legality, it was about fear. Fear that the system they all served would be forced to admit how often it failed. One senator leaned in during a committee recess and whispered, "You're going to lose friends over this." JD didn't blink. Then they weren't friends. The final blow came that Thursday. A co-sponsor, someone JD had spoken with late into the night, someone who'd shaken his hand and promised support, announced he was withdrawing his name, on camera, smiling. "We must be careful," the senator said, "not to politicize pain." JD watched the footage in silence, then walked out of the chamber. That evening, he stood on the steps of the Capitol. No staff, no suit jacket, no talking points, just a mic, a coat, and a storm rolling over the DC skyline. He looked directly into the camera. "They say this bill is too aggressive, that it moves too fast, that it bypasses bureaucracy. And they're right, because when a child is choking, you don't wait for a committee hearing. You act." His voice rose, not with rage, but with conviction. "They say I'm politicizing pain. No, I'm politicizing silence. I'm politicizing neglect. I'm politicizing the idea that some lives are worth less because of their zip code." He paused. "And if that makes this uncomfortable, good." The video aired that night and cut through like a siren. On local news in Ohio, on Reddit threads run by veterans, on Facebook pages shared between mothers whose children had coughed for weeks straight. A grandmother in East Palestine wrote in the comments, "He's not yelling, he's remembering." But inside the Capitol, doors were closing. A key committee postponed the vote. Lobbyists flooded inboxes. Cable pundits accused JD of emotional manipulation. One even laughed on air. Who knew Appalachia could bring DC to its knees? JD kept going, not because he was winning, but because the betrayal only made the mission clearer. 3 days after JD Vance introduced the Community Safety and Response Act, the resistance hit like a cold wind from both sides of the aisle. In a closed-door meeting, a senior Republican senator, once a vocal supporter of JD's outspokenness, leaned back in his leather chair and sighed. "It's admirable, JD, but you're giving towns too much leash. You'll break federal protocol." From across the table, a Democrat known for championing public health raised her eyebrow. "I agree with the spirit," she said, "but 72 hours? You'll have mayors declaring emergencies every time a thunderstorm hits." JD's jaw tightened. "This isn't about rain," he snapped. "It's about toxic clouds thick enough to burn your throat. It's about silence that lasted long enough to kill." But the room had already begun to close in. Overnight, his bill lost 2 early co-sponsors. By morning, 3 more issued polite statements about further review and complex implications. They didn't call it betrayal, but that's how it felt. Even some of JD's closest allies pulled back. One texted privately, "Timing's wrong. We need unity, not agitation." He didn't reply. In his office, JD turned to a wall covered with newspaper clippings, photos of the derailment, families clutching masks, headlines that once praised his courage. Now the mood had shifted. The narrative was mutating into a question mark. Is Vance overplaying his hand? Bold or reckless, the senator who won't compromise. But he didn't care about optics. What haunted him were the moments no camera caught, the emergency shelter with air too thick to breathe, the teacher sobbing into her sleeve, the veteran who whispered, "I fought overseas. I never thought I'd be poisoned back home." So he took a risk. He called a press conference, not from the Capitol steps, but from a modest playground in East Palestine, where a swing set still sagged from ash and a taped sign read, "Do not use." JD stood alone beneath a gray sky, a single mic set up beside the burned mulch. He didn't start with statistics. He didn't start with blame. He started with a name. Aiden, the boy whose unfinished homework still sat folded in his grieving mother's purse. He was 8. He loved trains. He had asthma. And after the derailment, he stayed inside, like they told him. He coughed until he didn't get up again. JD paused. A wind moved through the trees. What if this was your child choking? His voice cracked, not with theater, but with exhaustion. We have 72 hours to act before silence becomes complicity. I don't care if it's inconvenient. I care if another parent has to hear the words, "too late." Across social media, the clip ignited. Within hours, hashtag 72 hours or less trended nationwide. Local papers praised the passion. Editorials questioned the delay. Voters began calling congressional offices in droves. But inside the Senate, the tide was still heavy. Some aides warned JD quietly that procedural traps were being set to stall the bill indefinitely. Behind closed doors, it was being called emotional legislation and unsustainable governance. He knew the term for that. Politics as usual. That night, as JD left the Senate chamber alone, a reporter caught up with him and asked, "If your bill fails, what will you do next?" He didn't hesitate. "Then I'll rewrite it and I'll bring it back, again and again, until someone listens." The camera clicked. Flash. Silence. The battle wasn't just for a bill anymore. It was for the soul of response itself. And JD Vance had made one thing painfully clear. He wasn't backing down. The final vote came on a gray Thursday morning. Senators filed in one by one, their footsteps heavy with calculation. Cameras rolled quietly from the balcony above, but there were no sweeping speeches this time. Just quiet nods, furrowed brows, and the rare moment of silence that precedes something irreversible. 51 to 49. The board lit green. The Community Safety and Response Act, after weeks of stonewalling, amendment battles, and a media firestorm, passed. The chamber didn't erupt. No standing ovations. But from the gallery, a single gasp escaped. A mother from East Palestine, clutching her son's photograph, closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Word spread fast. In Ohio, the first place to ring was the shuttered glass factory on the south edge of East Palestine. For the first time in months, the bell above its gate clanged once, then again, then a third time. Old workers came by, some still in boots they hadn't worn since the derailment. A foreman wept openly. "They're going to fund the cleanup. We can start over." At the elementary school turned shelter, a girl pointed to the chalkboard. Someone had written, "JD didn't forget." Underneath, crayon stars bloomed in red and blue. That night, JD stood in front of a crowd. Not in D.C., but back where it started. The park in East Palestine was half lit, the ground still scarred, the air still wary. But people came. They brought folding chairs, dogs on leashes, kids wrapped in blankets. He didn't stand on a podium, just on the grass. "This wasn't just a bill," he said. "It's a promise. That no town should have to scream just to be seen. That a child's lungs matter more than political calendars. That silence can't win." He paused. "And to the people who said, 'It's too late,' I say, not this time." They didn't chant. They didn't clap wildly. But they stood. They stood in the same place they had once fallen. This time not in fear, but in defiance of forgetting. And somewhere beyond the park fence, just barely audible in the wind, was the steady echo of a train whistle, moving slow, but clean. The Capitol felt quieter than usual the morning JD returned from Ohio. No protests, no camera crews, no aides waiting with binders. Just the hush that follows a storm finally passing. JD stepped into his office and walked straight to the far wall, the only blank one left. The space had waited patiently for weeks, and now he knew what belonged there. He removed the envelope from his bag. It was aged from being folded and unfolded too many times. The leaked memo, the one where an unnamed official wrote, "No immediate federal intervention required. Public perception risk, minimal." He didn't reread it. He'd memorized every word. He slid it into the frame himself. No staff, no ceremony. Just hands that had once changed diapers and loaded rifles and held the grief of strangers in gas-lit school gyms. Below the memo, a simple quote etched into reclaimed wood. They were worth showing up for. He stared at it for a long while. Across the room was the crayon drawing from the little girl, the one where he was drawn with a shield, and beside it, the pin she'd later gift him. He had always thought politics was about power, but the wall behind him was starting to look more like a shrine to something deeper. Not victories, reminders of what silence costs, of what showing up means, of what justice really looks like. Not in speeches, but in scars that heal because someone stayed long enough to see them. He returned unannounced. No entourage, no advance team. Just a beat-up rental and a ball cap pulled low as he drove back into East Palestine under a sky smeared with the soft pastels of autumn. It had been nearly a year since the derailment. Cleanup crews had left. News vans had vanished. But the town had kept going. The main street had new paint. Kids biked again. The grocery had reopened, and someone had taped a cartoon of JD over the freezer aisle with the words, "Local hero discount, if your name rhymes with Vance." He laughed softly when he saw it. No interviews, no live streams. He just walked. At the town diner, a waitress hugged him before he sat. "You made us feel like we mattered," she said. Behind her, a boy no older than 7 walked up and handed him something small, a silver pin shaped like a train engine. JD looked closer. On the back, etched by hand, "Mayor of Nowhere." The room chuckled when he held it up. JD pinned it to his jacket. "That," he said smiling, "is the best title I've ever earned." Later, he stood again near the cracked crossing light, repaired now, blinking slow and steady. He touched the rail with his hand, cool with the breath of fall. There were no words left to give them, but maybe there didn't need to be, because justice isn't a verdict or a headline. It's coming back, when the world stops watching. The studio lights were bright but soft, like the kind used for interviews where no one's expecting a fight. JD sat across from the anchor of 60 Minutes. The room had that stillness right before a question that isn't meant to be answered cleanly. "You've said before that the train derailment changed you," she asked gently. "What made you drop everything at 4 a.m. and go?" JD didn't blink. "At 4 a.m., he said, I didn't hear politics. I didn't hear strategy. I heard a town gasping for air, and nobody was coming." He paused. "I knew I couldn't save everything, but I could show up. And sometimes that's where justice begins. Not with a win, but with a witness." The interview ended. It aired the next night, reaching millions. But in East Palestine, they watched from the community center, still using the same projector they had bought for emergency updates. When JD said, "I heard a town gasping for air," the room went still. And when the broadcast cut to black, it didn't fade out in silence. Instead, the screen faded into one last image. A bronze plaque mounted beside the rebuilt school entrance. No fanfare, just 6 words etched with quiet certainty. He came. He stayed. He spoke. No applause followed, but in that room, and across America, something settled. Not finished, not fixed, but remembered, and that, at last, was enough. Sometimes the most powerful acts of leadership aren't broadcast. They're remembered in silence, in gestures, in the lives touched when no one else showed up. J.D. Vance's story in East Palestine reminds us that justice isn't a performance. It's presence. It's a hand on a broken rail, a voice for those coughing in forgotten corners, a quiet return when the cameras are gone. This wasn't about politics. It was about a promise. To be there. To stay. to speak when it mattered most. And in your own life, who are you still showing up for, even when no one's watching? If this story touches you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to JD Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching JD Stories.